So let me just open up with prayer. Lord, let this not be about me. Let this not be about the presentation. Let it be about your words and how those words give us knowledge of you. Lord, let your words penetrate us and give us hope that of things better to come, and that with you we can do anything, and that with your grace we are saved. We pray these things in your name. As for those of you that might be a guest here, I am not Pastor Patrick. I normally do a little, not a Sunday school thing, more like hosting a class in the corner where with a small group we sit and we talk about things. I throw out things like, my first question usually to the class, as we all know, is, what did we do last week? And I get a blank stare from everybody around, and we start going through that. So as we go through this today, let me just get this up here. There we go. As we go through this today, you may find that I stop and look at you into the audience, and I'm expecting a reaction. I'll get over that. I'm not used to doing a monologue, so it'll come. What I want to talk about today is grace. And until I didn't understand grace until I read a David Swindel's book, or Chuck Swindel's book on David. And it was there I suddenly had a moment where I get it. And that's what I want to talk about, because when we see words and we use them all the time, oftentimes we really don't get the meaning. Like today, in the Psalms that we had today, there was the word justice. It was mentioned twice in Psalm 99. Did anybody have you think of what justice was? In the songs that we sang, mercy and grace were mentioned. When you were listening to Amazing Grace, did you really think it was amazing, or did you just, as we all normally do, just go through the words and the song's great and the tune's good and the music up on the stage is always good? So I had to say that because Shelley's in that crowd. I'd hear about it if I got home. But do we actually understand the words that we see? And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. We're in pretty turbulent times right now. You listen to the news, you're overwhelmed with Trump stuff and defense spending and deficits and new programs and that. And we hear the words, millions, billions, and trillions. There's millions of dollars going here. We're sending a couple billion over there. The deficit in the United States is going to be $1 trillion. Any of that have impact on you? It's just noise. They all seem to blend together. So here's an example. What is a million seconds? What is a billion seconds? And what is a trillion seconds? Now, if you've been in my class, I've used this example before. So, 1 million seconds equals 11 days, or a little more than 11 days. And I know the first time I saw that, I actually had to pull out a calculator and work it out and go, oh yeah, it's 11 and a half days. What's 1 billion seconds, do you think? See, I'm pausing again. The monologue problem. It's 33 years. Okay. What's a trillion seconds? Obviously, it's 1,000 millions, right? 33,000 years. So when we talk about a $1 trillion deficit, you should be sitting up and taking notice. In the example that in the pastoral prayer, we talked about the 3 levels of government. How much do you think Kings County spends to keep this county the way it is? About $120 million. What does the province spend? About $19 billion. And what does the federal government spend? About $500 billion. So again, you start seeing when you see those words, it starts making a difference. What I want to talk about is the story of Mephibosheth. Man, and I tell you, I've been practicing that word all week, and I'm still not getting it right. It's like when I was taking my French language training, I couldn't say squirrels in French, des écureuils, and I had to create a story. Every story I created had squirrels in it, so I could just get past that point. And this is what I've been doing all week, is with Mephibosheth, is sitting there every time I'm mucking out a stall, good job, Mephibosheth, and that kind of stuff. So, anyways, the story of Mephibosheth, we just read it. Chuck Swindoll called this story the most amazing story of grace in the Old Testament. And I must admit, I don't remember in Sunday school being ever taught this. We got David and Goliath, we got, Bathsheba, David and Bathsheba, that really wasn't taught in Sunday school for obvious reasons. And then, it was kind of like Jonah and the fish, was the next. I didn't really remember anybody talking about Mephibosheth. And it's a story where, if you look at it, you can see our salvation. David is basically is an image of God. Jonathan is an image of Christ. Mephibosheth is an image of all of us as sinners, and even Ziba, that we were in the story, is the helper of the Holy Ghost. So in that story, we talk about. We don't even use the words justice, mercy, and grace in that story. The story is a real life story about a person who is pulled out of their circumstances and put it into a higher place. So before we go any further, we probably need to have some definitions. So from the perspective of justice, if you start looking these up from a biblical perspective, you get a definition like justice is the quality of doing what is right. Okay, yeah, I get that. Mercy is the gift of God's undeserved kindness and compassion. Yep. Grace is the unmerited favor of God. But I struggle, those are kind of, for me, are kind of academic definitions. They don't have as much impact. So we've talked about this again in our small group on Sunday morning, but justice, in simple terms, is getting what you deserve. Now, justice can be good and bad, right? Because bad, you committed a crime, you go to jail, that's justice. You have a company that you build up, that's bad, obviously, but you have a company that you build up and it helps people, and as a result you get a reward, that's good. So justice can be good or bad. Mercy, not getting what you deserve. Now, that's really showing the compassion, someone's compassion towards you. You really deserve this, but I'm not going to do anything about it. And then finally, grace, getting what you don't deserve, right? It can't be earned. It's undeserved. It can't be earned. It can't be repaid. And in a lot of cases, it's not even logical. This whole story is about that. Just as an aside, I did a quick check in the Bible to see how many times these words were mentioned, and the numbers will vary depending on your translation and other things, but the ratios don't change. And what you see in the Old Testament, it's all about mercy. Or it's all about mercy. In the New Testament, it's all about grace. And obviously with the coming of Christ, that grace is so evident and in person in the New Testament. So, first of all, I guess we need to talk about who is Mephibosheth. Erica did such a brilliant job on saying that all that time. He's the son of Jonathan. Jonathan was David's best friend, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. He's the grandson of Saul, the king, the first king of the Israelites. So he's in line for the throne. His name means from the mouth of shame or end of shame. There was a fair bit of discrepancy, not discrepancy, but I would say 2/3 of the people that I looked at and what they had to say about Mephibosheth used the mouth of shame, and then a smaller group used the end of shame. Either way, there's shame associated with the name of Mephibosheth. And Saul's other son, other than Jonathan, is named Ishbosheth, which means man of shame. So shame is involved in the family, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. For those of you that have been in the little room with me, I like timelines. I like understanding, how old somebody is, who their lives overlap with, where do they fit into the puzzle, and so we need a little bit of a backstory to get to where David is sitting at the beginning of verse 1 of chapter 9 of 2 Samuel. So, and I didn't build this. I didn't build this chart. Some other faithful servant of God had it on the internet, and I'll be blunt, I stole it. Anyways, so this is on the left-hand side of this, and I do have a laser pointer here. On the left-hand side of this is David's life, his age, 0 to age 70 when he dies. On the right-hand side is the kings, Saul, Ishbosheth, David, Solomon, and how many years they reigned. And in between here is all the things that happens. So we need to realize what's gone on in David's life to get him to here. So, whoops, wrong, back. So at the beginning, David's the youngest of eight sons, and Samuel anoints him at a young age. The only age we know for sure of David is this one here in the middle, where he's 30 years old, and he's the king of Judah. That's explicit. So everything else you have to kind of speculate backwards. So David's anointed by Samuel as a future king, anointed but not appointed. Okay. That sets in motion, why is David anointed? Because Saul has basically gone against God's will, and God has taken away Saul's favor. You're not going to be king. I've got someone else who's going to be king for you. And why is Saul king to start with? Do you remember? It's because the people of Israel didn't have king and judges, and they wanted to have a king so they could be like all the other nations. So as a result, God appoints Saul as the next king. Samuel is told Saul's the man, and Saul becomes king. And over time, Saul disobeys, power corrupts, he gets into witches and demons and all other things, and it's a slide downhill. So, David, we all know the story of David and Goliath. Why does David have to fight Goliath? Oh, again, that pregnant pause, sorry. David needs something to be distinguished from the crowd, right? He needs to fight the giant that allows him for Saul to see him and to be coming to Saul's court. So David kills Goliath. David then comes into the court of Saul, and from there, Saul gets his heart hardens against David more and more and more as he sees God in David's life and not in his own. We get into this time frame here. And that's where Jonathan and David are becoming really good buddies, and They are very close, and we'll talk about that a bit later here too. And in that process, Saul starts scheming up things to how to kill David. I mean, if you want to read that section of 1 Samuel, Saul's really intent on getting rid of David. I mean, there's just story after story after story of how Saul does that. Bad things happen, and the Philistines eventually destroy Saul's army, kill Saul and Jonathan on the same day, and now there's a power vacuum in the nation of Israel. And then we find Abner convinces Saul's other son Ishbosheth to become king. He takes the northern kingdom. There's more fighting between David's supporters and Saul's supporters. Ishbosheth is murdered in the process by people that thought that murdering Ishbosheth would give them favor in David, and that didn't work out for them because they were killed and had their various body parts hung on the wall. And in the end, back. In the end, we end up here with David's made king of Judah, and then after 7.5 more years of fighting, David's made king of Israel in its total. And we can go on where then David and Bathsheba, Solomon, and all that kind of stuff, and David dies at age 70. But for where we want to be, this is where Mephibosheth comes into place, and this is where he meets with David. There's approximately, let's call it 20 years in that time frame, because those aren't actual time frames. Okay. So that's the backstory. So back to verse 1. David asks the question, is there anyone still left at the house of Saul to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? Where is David at this point in time? He's at the top of his power. He's in chapter 8 of 2 Samuel. He's just fought all the battles that consolidate his power. In chapter 7, it talks about how he realizes that the only reason he's where he is at is because of God. So he's in tune with God. He's at the peak of his power, and he's probably sitting back and he's saying, is there anybody left in the house of Saul? It's kind of like, I wonder if there's anybody left. What do you think that means to the servants that are around him when they hear Saul say that? Well, they're all thinking David. David wants to get rid of any of Saul's next of kin, because that's how regime change worked in those days. Regime change worked with you took over and then you killed off any of the opponents, and they were fairly ruthless of it. In fact, in modern times, you can probably see it with the Russian Revolution, where they killed off the Romanov family so that there wouldn't be any Russian Tsar to take over. Why is David asking this question? Remember back when I said in the previous chart that David and Jonathan were best buddies and everything else? Well, they made a covenant. In 1 Samuel 20 and verses 14 to 17, and the backstory to this is that David's trying to tell Jonathan that Saul's after him. Jonathan doesn't quite believe, and basically, David says, "I'm pretty sure he's throwing spears at me when I'm playing music, and I had to dodge him twice." So they come up with a scheme to see if Saul is unfavorable to David or not. And in the process, Jonathan obviously recognizes that even though he's the crown prince, the guy that's supposed to inherit things, he recognizes that David is going to be the king, or downstream. Because he says here, But show me unfailing kindness like the Lord's kindness as long as I live, so that I might not be killed, and do not ever cut off your kindness from my family. That's back to that regime change problem. Not even when the Lord has cut off every one of David's enemies from the face of the earth. Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, may the Lord call David's enemies to account. And Jonathan had David reaffirm his oath out of the love for him, because he loved him as he loved himself. These guys were close. This was more than just a bond. So when we see David ask if there's anybody in that left the house of Saul, it's because of that covenant. But it's even more than that, because he says, to whom can I show kindness for Jonathan's sake? And the English words don't do justice to this word that in Hebrew is herset or kurset, and it refers to like a steadfast love, like a familial love, like a love born out of a covenant. It's just not, I opened up the door, I mowed his lawn, and I was kind to him. It's almost an obligation to show that kindness. It's in other words, it's grace. Now, David has obviously got to find Mephibosheth. So he doesn't know who he is, and he puts out a call out there, and off they go. Someone finds a servant named Ziba. Now there was a servant of Saul's household named Ziba. They summoned him to appear before David and the king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" "At your service," he replied. I don't know where Ziba was, but Saul's estates were all taken over by David at his death, more than likely. Ziba was probably still running some of those. This may have been an easy thing to find, or it may have been a hard thing, but either way, Ziba shows up. Now you see the word "the king" is highlighted there. I want you to pay attention to where you see the words "the king" in the narrative as we go along, because there's something interesting the way the narrator of the story tells the story and how he uses those words. The other thing to take note is David isn't just sitting back and waiting for Mephibosheth or anybody else to show up. He's actively seeking out Saul's next of kin. In the next verse we see, the king asked, "Is there no one still alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness?" Ziba answered, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." So why does he change from just showing kindness to showing God's kindness? He's really setting this. Remember, David is at this point in his life is really in sync with God. He's really wanting to. He knows that it's only by the grace of God, by the kindness of God, that he is at where he is at now, and he wants to pass on that kindness to others. There's a strong message in here for us about kindness. When we think about all the kindness that God has given to us, we should be turning it around and giving it right back to someone else out there. Ziba answered the king, "There is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet." Okay, now this question again. Why does he say this? Why doesn't he just say, "Hey, I know where he is. He's going to be over here." But why does he say he's lame in both feet? Now, there's more to Ziba as you go through the story, but could it be that Ziba is trying to show compassion? Because he's not sure what David's going to do, even though David's saying, "I want to show kindness." Does he really mean that? But maybe Ziba is trying to sit there and say, "Hey, this guy's got some other issues. Be compassionate." Or Is he trying to say, you don't want this guy in your court? He's crippled. He shouldn't be hanging around the king. How did Mephibosheth become crippled? Well, in 2 Samuel 4, we find out that Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. So, the news has come, the king is dead, the Philistines are coming, perhaps David and his cronies are coming. Either way, I got to get out there. Grabs a 5-year-old, and something bad happens. And it's not just, I've got a gimpy leg. It's obviously he's lame in both legs. It's interesting to note the wording here in this too. Like when he says he fell, he comes from a rebellious family, and he fell. Adam and Eve come from rebellion, and they fell. It's you see. I find it always amazing how the Bible parallels itself from beginning to end. The other thing to think about too is oftentimes we see these words and we don't even think about what does that actually mean to have the condition that he has. There's no modern surgery. He's probably in pain. Maybe his legs are totally disabled such that he has to drag them across the floor. I don't know. But either way, it is significant. And you'll see that it's significant because it keeps getting repeated in this story, that they keep bringing this up. So, the king says, where is he? Now, interestingly enough, the king doesn't ask about his disability. Doesn't say, hey, how badly is he crippled? Is he, is there anything we need to consider? Is he, okay, he's crippled, but is he good looking? I don't mind having a good looking person around the thing. But he doesn't. He totally disregards the cripple side of it. And he asks, where is he? And Ziba answered, he's in the house of Machir, the son of Amiel, in Lo-debar. Lo-debar is off there in the corner. I don't need it. Up there in the corner. You notice how far it is away from Jerusalem. It's on the wrong side of the Jordan River. If you're on the left side of the Jordan River, as we look at it, you're in the Promised Land. If you're on the other side, you're not out of the Promised Land. Lo-debar means no pasture land, or no word. It's in the wilderness. It's as remote and far as away you can get from Jerusalem and still be amongst the tribes of Israel. What else do we know about him living? Mephibosheth, where he lives. He's living in someone else's house. He's not living in his own house. So, every indication is that he left the palace, ran away. They left all the wealth behind them. They've scurried to this part of the countryside where Ishbosheth had his headquarters. So he's got a little bit of family there. He's living at someone else's house. He's in the wilderness. He's got to have people that look after him because he's crippled, and he's as low as in Lo-debar. He's as low as they can get. The bar has been lowered, and he's way down there, right? So King David had him brought from Lo-debar, from the house of Machir, the son of Amiel. Now think about that again. Where did Mephibosheth is sitting in this house, and the king has obviously sent people out there. They're not going to be a small group of folks, right? Because it's in the wilderness, so it's probably a troop of something with lots of folks in uniforms and highfalutin clothes and stuff. And they arrive and they pound on the door. Now, Mephibosheth isn't probably going to answer the door because he's crippled. He can't get to the door. So he's probably in some part of the thing, and he hears the commotion, and it's the king coming to get Mephibosheth. What do you think the reaction is in him? He's thinking that this is it. For the last 20 years or so, 15 years, I've been sitting around waiting for something to happen, and the coin is dropped, and I'm coming. The king has come to get me, right? And then they got to travel all the way to Jerusalem, which is, I don't know how long that takes, but probably 2 or 3 days. And all the way along there, I don't know if the men that are getting him are overly aware of why they're getting him. They're just probably getting him, and there's Mephibosheth has to think about the whole what's going to happen when I show up at the other end. So in verse 6 we see, when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. Again, think about what that entails. Like, first of all, we know that Mephibosheth more than likely is poor. And now he's coming up into the high court of King David. So someone's probably cleaned them up, right? He gets to David, and he bowed down, and it's more than just bowing down. He basically prostrates himself on the floor. Now, this may not apply to you young folks, but I know when I'm lying prostrate on the floor, I'm like a beached whale trying to get up. So someone who like Mephibosheth, who's crippled, this is no small deal to be lying on the floor in front of the king, because it's humiliating, and you're really humbling yourself. And then David says, Mephibosheth. And notice there's an exclamation mark at the end of that, at least in my translation. Some translations may not have that. And an exclamation mark, when it's used there, is to acknowledge great emotion. It does other things in the Bible. That's but one of the purposes of an exclamation mark. And he calls him by name, with emotion. And remember when I asked you to look at, as we went through here, the way the king, how many times the king is used and where David is used? And here we have, it's not the king saying Mephibosheth, it's David saying Mephibosheth. It's almost as if the narrator of the story wants to, switch up things and say, when the king is talking to Ziba, it's all about getting things done. It's very formal. But when the king David is talking about Mephibosheth, it's personal. And maybe when David sees Mephibosheth, he sees Jonathan in his as he looks at them, as a visual reminder, almost as if, like when God looks at us, does he see Jesus, in us? So he humbles himself. And David's reaction, first things he says to him is, "Don't be afraid." So, what is David showing? Based on the definitions. Mercy. Yeah, that's very good. You see how I just don't like this monologue stuff. David says, "Don't be afraid," to him, "for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan." That's back to that covenant piece, right? There's nothing Mephibosheth could do. It has nothing to do with him. It's all about the covenant, about Jonathan. And again, it's nothing to do about us. It's all about Jesus, the covenant. "I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul." What's that? Grace, right? And it's not just some of the land, it's all the land. Who owns all the land right now? David, probably. And so basically David is saying, taking out of his pocket all the cash he's got and saying, you can have it. And maybe David's got a lot more, but at this moment in time, what happens to Mephibosheth from a financial perspective when he gets this land? He's probably the second richest man other than David in the country. You know, how much wealth does a king accumulate in there? How much wealth does Saul have after 40 years of running the country? Lots. You know, you just have to look today at how many people, leaders and dictators, how much they have. And then the other thing that's so unusual here and illogical is that he didn't say, I give you all the land and by the way, go live there, or live in the back cottage. He says, I give you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. Not only that, not only am I giving you all this undeserved wealth, I want you to be with me. I want you to be sitting at the table, communing with me. So Mephibosheth bowed down and said, what is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? You know, in those days, dogs weren't pets. And I know some of you out there probably love your dogs more than your kids, but a dog was just a nuisance, and a dead dog was even more of a nuisance because you had to get rid of it. But Mephibosheth, you know, his reaction is, I don't get it. I am so unworthy. I am so worthless. You know, being a cripple in those days, you couldn't contribute anything to society. You were nothing. And, you know, and he says, why? What does the king do? We find out that he summoned Ziba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I've given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. He totally ignores Mephibosheth's self-evaluation. He doesn't care. I'm not in it for what you think you are. I'm in it because I want you. So he says to Ziba, you and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, you will always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons and 20 servants. Ziba's a rich person. He's probably been running Saul's former estates up until this point in time, and now he's now going to run it all for Mephibosheth. Why is David doing this? Because he knows that Mephibosheth, he's crippled. He can't do this. He's coming from a background where maybe he's never managed these large estates, and that he's giving him a helper so that he can fully benefit or fully appreciate or fully realize the grace that has been given to him. Ziba may not have been all that happy about that, but then Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. So Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. Not just anyone, not just sit at the end of the table and keep quiet. It's, I want you there as a full participant of the family. I'm adopting you, is what he's saying. Mephibosheth had a young son named Micah, and all the members of Ziba's household were servants of Mephibosheth. Micah means, who is like God? And I found this interesting because initially I thought Mephibosheth would be an angry person for his circumstances, that, I was basically in line for the throne. I came from all these wealthy places. I had money and wealth and potential. Next thing I know, I can't walk. I'm living in the wilderness. I'm living in someone's house. I'm poor. I've got David's after me, and you would think that somewhere along the line you would just be a bitter person in there. And that's what I kind of thought, that, that's what made Mephibosheth, pulling Mephibosheth out so much more poignant, is that how that bitter person could be out. But when I realized what Micah meant, the fact that he was married and he had a son, and he named him who is like God, it tells me that even in the worst moments of his life, Mephibosheth probably still was in tune with God. And that's why he was so humble when he came before David, both when he received mercy and when he received grace. It's because he could have said, hey, it's about time you finally found me and brought me up. But no, he was totally humble about it. And that's probably because he was in tune with God, and he was just overwhelmed with what was being given to him. And Mephibosheth lived in Jerusalem because he always ate at the king's table. He was lame on both feet. That's the fourth time that we've said he will eat at the king's table, and the third time, there were 3 times I think it was always in there. Eating at the king's table and being repeated that many times, you got to sit back and take notice, because if it's being repeated in the storyline multiple times, there's a reason for it. This is a point you need to sit back and take account of. And they keep bringing up he was lame on both legs. Why? I mean, the story ends at this point as he's lame on both legs. Well, we knew that. You told us he was lame on both legs. He's lame on both legs now. He's eating at the king's table. He's still lame on both legs. It's because Mephibosheth doesn't get any better. His crippledness is there permanently. It doesn't, just because he receives all this stuff, it doesn't go away. He's still lame. So when we're eating at the king's table, this is where Chuck Swindoll's story really hit home for me, because what's happening? You're sitting at the table, you're communing. You're looking down the table. Mephibosheth, there's sometime downstream. Solomon's there. Hey, how was your day, Solomon? I'm building this temple. Things are pretty busy. The queen of this or the prince of that comes to visit David. Boom. They're sitting at the head table. All David's mighty warriors are. We were out there, battling the Philistines, and it was a tough day at the office. He's sitting there at the table. The food's good. The communion's there, and when he's sitting at that table, the tablecloth of grace is covering his legs. He is just as equal to everybody around that table. And that's when the aha moment hit me. I suddenly realized, I am Mephibosheth. I'm the guy out there, with my spiritual well-being. I'm crippled. I've got all my insecurities, as with Pastor Patrick has showed us when going through the 10 Commandments. None of us can live up to the standard. I'm living in the wilderness. And some of the wilderness is my own making. Some of it is the circumstances of life that have come at me. I'm not seeking the King as I should. Especially earlier in life, did I actually, hey, I'm about to make this major decision, so I should just pray about it. No, I just went and made the major decision and suffered from it. And I'm not living a life of peace and contentment. All the things that are happening in the world, all the things that are happening in my life, my family, and everything else, am I sitting there going, I'm at peace with that? Am I content with that? No, I bet you every one of us here are sitting there going, got to do something about this, got to do something about that. And we lose the moment. We lose the moment for understanding what God's grace will do for us. So God's grace, He seeks me through Jesus. That's the first thing. I don't have to look for God. He's already seeking me. He covers all my issues with grace. It doesn't matter, I'm crippled. You know, when I sit at the tablecloth of grace is going to cover my crippledness. He wants me at the table always. You know, I'd love to be at some point in time, be sitting at the table and go, hey, Moses, pass down the potatoes. You know, all the people that are going to be at that table, you know. I don't deserve it. I can't earn it. I can't repay it. I just have to believe and obey. So when we sing Amazing Grace, do we really think it's amazing? You know, when you look at those words, when you see those words in those hymns, you know, I always, because I've kind of been tuned to this, for me, every time I see the word grace, it really hits home to me that it's absolutely amazing. That's what makes Christianity so different from everywhere else, every other religion. It's the grace. It's what Christianity is. It's the grace of God reaching down and pulling us out of the muck. Okay, I'll just close in prayer here. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for the patience that you have with us, that every one of us is worthy of being saved by you, and you seek us on a daily basis. Lord, just let your words and your love pour into us. Let us guide us in this week, and Lord, let us show kindness to all those out there and that we meet, so that they can see your grace as well. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Okay, we're going to sing The Wonderful Grace of Jesus, and